Hi everyone, I'm Dre, a health IT consultant who's been working in this field for over 20 years. And today I want to talk about a particular role in health IT that gets a lot of attention, and that is the clinical application analyst. So, depending on the organization, these also might be referred to as EHR analysts, build analysts, system analysts, or something that is specific to the application or module that they're working on. The first thing that I want to clear up is that if they are clinical application analysts, the term clinical doesn't refer necessarily to the professional background of the individual. It usually refers to the type of application that these individuals are working on. So that doesn't mean that there are no clinicians that are analysts in this category. There absolutely are. And depending on sort of where you work, what pieces you work on, the clinical background can actually be incredibly helpful. So some might think that the clinical applications analyst is just configuring the system that's going to be used, but they're actually responsible for understanding the part of the system that they work on to a level of detail that allows them to configure it, maintain it, troubleshoot it, and understand what could be affected when something changes either within that area or externally that might impact their area. So that last piece on impact is particularly important because there is very little within a clinical application that functions entirely on its own. So if we look at an orders analyst, for example, they may be primarily responsible for configuring orders, but changes they make could impact clinical documentation, pharmacy, billing, regulatory reporting, interfaces that are going to another system, CCDAs, all sorts of things. They don't need to know how to configure all those different areas, but they do need to understand when the area that they're focused on is going to interact or impact those other areas so they know when to bring in other people to have further conversations. Most of the work that clinical application analysts are going to do is going to follow a typical life cycle. So that life cycle is to understand, to design, to configure, to test, to implement, to support, and then to optimize. So if we look at what that actually means during a regular work week, you might find an analyst starting their day troubleshooting something that isn't functioning correctly in the EHR. So they'll likely try to recreate the scenario, replicate the issue, and then systematically break down the various configuration steps to figure out what's causing that. Sometimes it might be an issue that's reported by an end user in the production environment. And other times the troubleshooting might be something they're currently building that they're validating for another team and have been asked to look at, or by something new that the vendor has put it into a development environment and it's not quite behaving as they thought it would. Other things that might happen during the week, they may interact with informaticists or clinical subject matter experts to work through a change request so that they can understand what the requirements are, what it is that the end users are actually looking to achieve, and walking the informaticist or the SME through the different options. If they do find an agreeable path, the analyst might then configure something in a development environment and test it before they bring in other analysts to take a look at how it interacts with their particular areas of expertise. They'll finalize what everything looks like. The build analyst will then document a build spec. They'll look to move it to a test environment and start working to coordinate an integrated test if it's in a system that's going to be connected to something else. One of the other pieces that they do in groups that they work with on a regular basis are project managers. And because of the in-depth knowledge that analysts have with configuration and testing and activities around their particular area, they are often called upon to identify EHR dependencies that need to be considered during project work, as well as to provide estimates in how long it will take them to actually complete configuration in different environments, what the process are for moving between environments, and some of the testing and implementation steps that are required for that. So if you're considering a role as a clinical application analyst, you may be wondering what kind of skills you would need. So of course, there's application and technical knowledge. Clinical analysts will need to develop a deep understanding of the application that they're working with, as well as a working knowledge of the different technical components that are sitting underneath that application and some of the integrated components that are attached to the application so that they can understand when work needs to extend beyond their particular expertise and they need to collaborate with other teams. They also need to understand clinical workflows. So they don't necessarily need to be clinicians, although, as I mentioned earlier, there are certainly a lot of clinical application analysts who do have backgrounds as clinicians or in hospital roles, but they do need to know enough about general healthcare processes and terminology to understand what end users are trying to accomplish, what area of patient care their application component is connected to, so that they can recognize when they need to pull in additional clinical expertise. Application analysts also need strong analytical and problem-solving skills. They also try to identify patterns so that they can recognize when something isn't behaving as it's expected to behave, so that they can dig into why. It's important to have attention to detail. With the breadth of functionality that exists in our clinical applications these days, there is so much nuance and so many sort of moving pieces and parts that if you take too broad of a look at things, you can easily miss things. So that detail and that really sort of honed in understanding in the area that they're supporting is very important. Application analysts need to be good collaborators and they need excellent communication skills. There are a number of situations where an application analyst will be interacting with both technical team members and clinical team members in the same meeting or on the same day, and they need to be able to communicate and articulate the functions of their area to both of those teams so that they can work together effectively. And the last sort of skill set that's important for analysts is adaptability and continuous learning. We all know that technology changes at an incredibly rapid pace. That is definitely not an exception in the healthcare space. So there is consistently things that are changing and things that are being updated. So there is a lot of adaptability required. It's not one of those jobs where you're just going to sort of sit at a keyboard and do the exact same thing every day for the next 20 years. So if that's the kind of thing you're looking for, clinical application analyst, definitely not for you. The role is really great for someone who likes figuring out how things work, solving problems, talking with all sorts of people, and really interacting with a lot of activities. Someone who can function in higher paced environments where change is fairly constant. Someone who enjoys translating a need into something concrete. And last but certainly not least, someone who likes to see something that they've done being used in an environment where patient care is being delivered. That's just a quick rundown of what a clinical application analyst does. It is a role that I have held during part of my career and that I absolutely loved. It's incredibly rewarding, although it can be demanding in some environments, but it is certainly something that I enjoyed. If you found this helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you again next time.